Hello, Malcolm Brady here from Dublin City University. I'm going to talk to you today about um, analysis. That's the second element of our PACE framework: purpose, analysis, choice, and execution. So we're going to talk about analysis today for the next number of minutes. So you can see here from the slide that I've broken analysis up into two sections, and this is typical. Most of your textbooks will have analysis broken into two sections: external or industry level analysis and internal or company level analysis. And most texts have a chapter on each of these particular approaches. Okay, so today I'm just going to give you an overview on analysis and talk you through the various techniques. There's, as you can see from this slide, there's quite a lot of techniques. So I'm going to give you an overview of these, and then we look at each technique, or at least some of the major techniques, in detail in later sessions. So I'm going to look above the dotted line first of all, and this is external analysis. And the most important thing with any of these tools is to make sure you're carrying them, or you're using the tool at the correct level of analysis. So the tools that are above the line are for, as I say, industry or macro level analysis beyond the firm or beyond the organization, outside of the organization. And it's important that you do that. Similarly, the ones below the dotted line are for analyzing within the organization. And again, it's critical that you use them properly. Generally speaking, people use the ones within the organization correctly, as in you typically analyze the organization. The problem usually arises with the external ones, where people do a 5-force analysis of Apple, for example. Well, you need to do the 5-force analysis of the mobile phone industry or the computer, the laptop industry, or whatever. You don't carry it out on a firm, okay? But people often fall into the trap of using the 5-force analysis to analyze the firm and its buyers and its suppliers and so on. That's not the correct way to use it. You're missing out on the value of the technique if you do that. So that's the first and probably the most important point I'm going to make here, is to make sure you use the tool at the correct level of analysis, or you analyze the right thing, the thing that the tool is designed to analyze. So we'll start at the top left corner there, and you'll see there, sorry, I'll give an overview first and then we'll look in more detail. The 4 boxes on the upper end of the slide are really different types of things you look at in terms of the external world. So on the left, it's PESTLE, the political, economic, and large scale things that are happening out there in the environment, very macro level. And you may pose various scenarios that you might determine that can be useful as well in terms of analyzing the external world. And from that, you can deduce what sort of trends are happening, or what forces are driving change in the industry or at the macro level of the environment. The second box there is economic characteristics, and there you're looking at what level of what size is the industry you're dealing with, what its growth rate is. Is it a mature industry or is it an emerging industry? How much differentiation takes place? What level of rivalry among firms? Is it dominated by one big firm, or is it made up of 1,000 small firms? What's the nature of the industry from an economic point of view? Are there economies of scale? Are there economies of scope? Are there learning effects? What's the nature of the industry from an economic point of view? Then we're looking at a bit more detail here now at the industry itself, and we move on to the level of competition taking place in the industry. And the most well-known tool for carrying out that is Michael Porter's 5-force analysis approach, which is very much to determine the level of competition taking place, and therefore, by consequence, the attractiveness of the industry. The second tool there I've mentioned is the value net from Brandenburger and Nailbuff, which looks very like the 5-force analysis, but it is really centered on a single firm and its competitors, its complementers, and so on. So that is centered around the firm, whereas the 5-forces is very much centered on the industry itself. And then on the far right, the competitor analysis, or strategic groups. And this is really where now you're looking at who are the actual competitors in this industry, what's their nature, what's their makeup, you may be able to identify their strategy as a pattern in their decision making, in the set of decisions they've made in the past. You may be able to infer their strategy from the pattern. And then strategic groups is another form of analysis, which is a kind of matrix type or cluster analysis. where you you identify how many major groupings there are in the industry, and which grouping is your firm or is the organization you're interested in, which grouping is that within. And there may, in some industries, there are quite distinct groupings, and in effect, firms compete within their grouping, not really within the industry as a whole. For example, in the restaurant industry, if you do an analysis of restaurants in, say, a city or a country, you'll generally find a very small number of high-class restaurants that are competing for Michelin stars and so on, and they're in a bracket of their own. And then you have, say, fast food restaurants that are nationally distributed, and they're in a grouping of their own. And firms tend to compete within that grouping as opposed to within the industry as a whole. McDonald's don't really compete with, in Ireland, Patrick Guibo. Even though they're both in the food industry or the sit-down restaurant industry, the groups they're in are entirely different. Okay, so you tend to compete within your strategic group. So having done all of that analysis, you should have a pretty good idea of the nature of the industry in which your firm or your organization or the organization you're interested in is competing. And out of that, you should be able to distill what are the key success factors for competing well in that industry. And they're, in a sense, the output of the external analysis. There's a small number of factors that are critical for you to get right, to be a good competitor, a successful competitor in the industry. It might be to do with marketing spend. You must have, you must be able, maybe for some industries, you need a really good image. For others, you need a really good supply chain. For others, you just need really good products. And some, it can be a mix of those. But the industry analysis should enable you to work out what are those key success factors. So then we drop below the line now, and we're now going to analyze the organization itself, or the firm itself, or the company itself. And we'll start with 4 boxes of techniques here. And we'll look briefly at those 4 boxes now. So you see on the left, bottom left, first of all, you'll analyze what is its current strategy. What does it currently do? How does it compete at the moment? So you look at marketing, product, R&D, with the various elements of its strategy, and work those out. And there's a couple of techniques we have that may enable you or assist in doing that. Mentioned there the business model technique. That's in a way a summary of the mission of the organization, the way it currently competes and what it does, its value proposition, its key processes, its key resources, and its economic logic, or its financial formula, how it makes money. The arenas model from Hambrick and Fredrickson is similar to the business model. It uses different terminology, but it covers very much the same ground. So that's a similar way of looking at a firm's current strategy. I've mentioned their stakeholder analysis. This is slightly different. This is looking at the stakeholders involved, and there are models by which you can formally do that. And that can be very useful, particularly in not-for-profits or public sector organizations, which are very much driven by stakeholder needs and stakeholder desires and influences. And then finally, we've the competitive strength analysis. And this ties in with our top right-hand corner, where you've already looked at the competitors in the industry and the strategic groups. So you know who those competitors are. Now you've examined your own strategy, and now you can compare or weigh up your approach against your competitors and do a matrix type or a tabular type analysis of your company against competitors across various criteria. Those criteria are probably the key success factors in the industry that you've already worked out from your external analysis. So you rate yourself and you rate all your competitors, your close competitors, on each of those factors. You assign a weighting to each factor because they may not be of equal weight, and you give a grade or a mark to your firm and to all the other firms, and then you can tot that up and work out how you rate against your competitors, and that gives you a good sense of where you lie in the industry. Obviously, there are industry bodies that do this kind of thing already, and they may already have done this work. Gartner Group tend to look at the IT industry, and they may have already carried out this type of weighting or this type of analysis, competitive strength analysis, for the various firms in the industry. So if so, well, you have that at hand. Second box there looks at, in a sense, what the organization can do what resources it has. And there's various models for resource analysis. The VRIN model is one. Valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable resources. You weigh up your resources under that term, under those terms, and see what resources have you got that you can use as a basis for competing into the future. Competencies is a very similar thing. It's what you do as opposed to what you have, but essentially, again, what things you can do particularly well. You're really looking at the things that you can do particularly well, and determine those competencies. And those competencies will drive you forward into the future, or you can leverage, you can use those competencies as a basis for competing into the future. Dynamic capabilities is an extension of the competencies framework, where it's not so much the static competencies, but how you can rebuild or keep innovating those competencies, keep renewing the competencies. And that comes under the heading of dynamic capabilities. And again, you might see what capabilities you have in terms of seizing opportunities, in terms of sensing opportunities, in terms of implementing opportunities, or implementing actions to meet opportunities. So that's really the resource, broadly speaking, the analysis techniques under the resource-based box. The third box across on the bottom right, on the bottom, the third one towards the right, is really now to do with activities. So again, that's the level of analysis you're looking at now. It's what the organization does in terms of specific activities. So I've broadly given the heading activity analysis. Porter uses that phrase. He also developed the technique of value chain. So there's particular value chain analysis, enabling activities and supporting activities. And the enabling activities are very much to do with the systems model, inputs, processing, outputs, and then after sales and so on. Okay, so that's his value chain analysis, and it's important to look at that, and indeed the value chains of your suppliers, and indeed your buyers, because those value chains it can be important to know what suppliers do to create the components that you use for as part of your product line, and how buyers use your product, because you may alter the product based on how buyers use it, and carry out some of that activity for buyers, or pass some of that activity on to buyers. So again, that analysis is important. And then following on from that is strategic cost analysis, where you're now looking at the activities themselves and trying to cost those activities and see which activities are you making, your money on, so to speak, and which activities are costing you more than you're gaining from the activities. And you may look at those activities in terms of a lean type analysis to take out some of the non-value adding activities. Although obviously you have to leave some that are technically non-value adding but are needed for various reasons. So it's not as simple as that. But at the same time, a good hard look at your activities, and that's what the lean total quantity movement has tended to do. It tends to look at activities and optimize, let's say, activities. And then there's a strategy canvas, Kim and Moburn, who, again, it's a technique that looks at activities and compares your firm against other firms in terms of their activities, and which ones you excel on, which ones you actually don't either carry out at all, or you diminish in importance. And some that you might enhance from above what others do. Okay, so that strategy canvas is a technique you can use to examine your offering, let's call it, and rate it against your competitors. And then the final box on the right-hand side, you'll see your strategic or SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I have also mentioned there the TOWS matrix, which is a matrix of strengths and weaknesses on one dimension and opportunities, threats on the other. And it's basically allowing you work out that you can use your strengths to seize opportunities, or indeed to ward off threats. Or in terms of your weaknesses, you can support those in terms of avoiding threats by dealing with the weakness, that sort of thing. So you're comparing your internal strengths, weaknesses versus external opportunities and threats. The opportunities and threats, where do they come from? Well, they come from your external analysis, the work you've already carried out above the line, above the dotted line there. So you've got a good understanding of what's going on out there, and now you can see how those external driving forces, changes taking place out there in the environment, whether they are opportunities for your firm or whether they are threats for your firm. And it's important to remember that the same trend taking place can be an opportunity for one firm and can be a threat to another in the same industry. So you need to see where you stand. And this is your chance. Your strength, your SWOT analysis allows you determine, having understood what changes are taking place or what trends are taking place, you now evaluate that from your own organizational point of view. Clearly, there's a financial analysis that can be carried out as well. All the ratios and so on that you've learned from your financial analysis modules, they can all be applied here. And it's important to look at the financial information if you have it at hand. It's not always available. Private companies don't give out much financial information, but PLCs or public companies are obliged to through their annual reports. So if you can get the annual reports for a number of years, you should be able to get the financial information on which you can base some kind of financial analysis. And that can give you a lot of extra information and precise information, and it can support some of the conclusions you may be drawing from other analysis, or indeed allow you to draw some new conclusions. So it's important to carry out the financial analysis. That then can be fed into your balanced scorecard. Again, another technique used in not only financial analysis of the performance of the firm, but also operational analysis and customer-based analysis, and then innovation or future or growth-oriented analysis. They're the four elements of the balanced scorecard. And they are another tool, distinct tool. Kaplan and Norton created that formula, and that's a distinct tool you can use. And then the final one there is benchmarking, where again you can compare your performance, either financial or indeed operational. Again, benchmark that against other equivalents, let's call it. They may be in the same industry, and you may have information about this from the industry body that may gather this type of information. As I mentioned, Gartner in the IT industry may be able to provide that information about competitor firms, so you can benchmark yourself against competitors for certain processes, how well you're doing in terms of costs and margins and so on. Or you can benchmark it against a similar activity carried out in another industry. Mortgage approval process, for example, could be compared with an insurance approval process in another industry. That might be easier to get, but it can still give you some kind of benchmark against which you can compare how well your own organization is doing. Now, we've carried out a whole host of different techniques there in terms of internal analysis, looking at different aspects of the firm. And out of all of that analysis, you should have a good understanding of where your firm is positioned. And from the industry analysis, a good understanding of what's going on in the industry and the nature of the industry. And out of all of that analysis, you should now be able to draw out the issues that are critical for the organization to deal with, the strategic issues. So the analysis is leading you to issues and to a diagnosis of where the firm should go or what the firm needs to deal with into the future. So bringing all the analysis together into, distilling it down to a small number of issues that senior management or indeed the organization as a whole must deal with. And that in a way is the critical outcome of all of your analysis. It's distilling it down to the half dozen things that must be dealt with. All right, so that's a quick, reasonably quick overview of the internal analysis stage of the PACE or Purpose, Analysis, Choice, Execution framework. So I'm going to finish at that point. So thank you.